You know what I hate? I hate it when you are part of a new group or you're meeting people, or maybe it's like an official interview for something, and they say, describe yourself in 3 words. Does anyone else hate this? Because thank you, Isaiah. So there's all these things that go through your head, right? You're like, well, what do they want to hear? Like, what are the things I should say? Like, what do they want from me? Like, what would sound good to them? That's what we think of first. What would sound good to them? And so we come up with this all happens like a second, right? Like, we come up with the 3 best words we can possibly think of, and then we're like, well, that sounds pretty cocky. I don't know if that actually describes me. And so then we kind of rework it, and then in the end, we end up with some list of words that sound okay, but not great, but not bad, but they don't really describe us in the end. It's just a mess. But for us as Christians, there's one word that we should land on that should be somewhere in our 3, every time. It's something we're called to. It's the word that's used to describe God. It's love. We read in the New Testament that God is love. It's the descriptor for God, and he calls it to be our primary descriptor as well. Love. So how are you doing with that? Next time someone says, give me 3 words to describe yourself. Are you coming up with love? Okay, that might sound a little arrogant in the end, but it is what we're called to. So are we doing okay with that? Does love actually fit us as a descriptor for us? Well, so a bunch of us have probably seen the studies and surveys, and we know that many non-Christians don't come up with love as one of the primary words to describe Christians. They actually come up with a lot of non-flattering things well before they ever get to love. But when we hear that, we push back on it, right? We start to think, well, that's not me. You don't know me. And we start to think about all the loving things that we do and in all the ways that we show love, and we come up with this big list of all the ways we're loving. But are we loving like Jesus loved? See, sometimes I think when we are talking about the ways we're loving, we just actually paint a little bit of godly love on top of a bad attitude, and we call it love. So, for example, this is that whole thing where we say to someone, oh, bless your heart, and we actually mean, oh, shut your mouth, right? That sounds so Christian and loving, but what's here and here isn't very Christian and loving. My grandparents were saintly people, it would seem, and were Christians for their whole life, as far as I know. Were part of this church for a while. When I would ride with them in the car sometimes, and they would get maybe cut off in traffic, or a car would tailgate them and then, punch it out around them and go tearing down the road past them. My grandfather, he wouldn't cuss them out or give them a hand gesture or even say something nasty about them. He'd be driving, take a deep breath, and he'd say, just gonna get to hell faster. Holy cow, right? I'm 8 or something, and it's what are you doing, Grandpa? This is crazy. But that's what we do a lot of times, right? Love isn't so much a descriptor as us as we make it look good sometimes. And there are moments when we have genuinely loving moments, but sometimes they are just moments. And love doesn't really fit us as a descriptor for our entire lives. We joke about it, but seriously. We get frustrated with people, don't we? We get frustrated with people. There's some people who we avoid if we see them out and about. Maybe we think bad things about some people. Maybe we hope bad things happen to some people. We're not like car accident bad things. We have some standards, right? But more like bad luck sort of things, right? Maybe we snap at people more than we encourage them. Doesn't sound very loving. But at the same time, we love our families, we love our friends, we're quick to say, I'll do anything for my family. I'll do anything for my friends. But there's this duality in us, isn't there? We love our family, we love our friends. But there are other times when we're not. People sometimes share things on Facebook that say stuff like, I'll always show you respect until you cross me, and then I'll be your worst nightmare. And there's some part of us that wants to go, yeah, that's right. Does that sound like anything Jesus would say? Yeah, whoever said no. Ben, thanks for the no. It doesn't. It just sounds like us, not Jesus. So the last few weeks, we've been trying to sort out what it means to be like Christ. And we've been talking about these 10 areas of our own lives where we're trying to grow to become more like Him. And so, it starts, or I should say ends actually, because this is our last week, with love. Love. So if you've got your worship folder, inside the middle section there is the 4 boxes. So if you've been here for other weeks of this series, we've had 4 boxes with each week, and it shows usually a progression of growth. Like when we started out with Christ, we're here, and then our experience grows to this, and our experience grows to this, and our experience grows to this. And it's a progression. But I want to say with love, with sacrificial love, that it's not so much we move from one box to the next, but it's rather that our box, or our love, gets bigger until it holds all 4 of those expressions of love. So let's start out the beginning and talk about kind of where we started out when we first come to Christ. Like when you came in this morning, so if you've been part of our church for a while and maybe you were here a little bit early, like it's so great when we come in and we're greeted by Marvina and her crew and a friendly smile and a handshake, and then maybe we get in here and someone we know comes up and shakes our hand and slaps us in the back, gives us a hug. Unless we're not okay with that, then we don't get a hug, and asks us, hey, how's your week been? And we get to tell them how our week's been. And that's just great. That makes us feel good. And then we show up to church. And so this is usually how it works when we first come to Christ. We love that feeling of being loved. And so when we first start out, like infants, when you're a baby, infants, there's been 100 studies on this, right? Infants need love to mature into fully functioning adults. And it's true for us as followers of Christ as well. When we experience love in the early stages of our Christian life, it helps us mature because we love it. We love everything. We love coming to church. We love worship. We love seeing people. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. We have that ingrained in us. For God so loved me that He gave His only Son. It's all so great. And it's natural for us to start out this way, and it's natural for us to continue to love that experience when we come in on Sunday mornings. But a lot of people who are starting out with Christ get stuck here. So along the way this morning, we're going to point out a couple places where you can get stuck. You've seen this. Someone starts coming to church, they accept Christ, they make some relationships in the church, come in on Sunday morning, it's great, hey, high fives, handshakes, hugs, how you doing? They're walking around, engaged with people, and then they just disappear one day, right? They miss a Sunday, then another, and then another, and then another, and then another. And maybe they get contacted, or you see them out and around, hey, I've been missing seeing you on Sunday mornings. Oh, yeah, work's been crazy, or this is going on, or that's going on, and okay, well, hopefully it works out. And then it's been months. And then one Sunday, they're here again. And same thing, everyone's happy to see them, handshakes, whole deal. They stick around for a while, and then they disappear again. You're probably thinking of some people you know who have gotten caught in this cycle, right? Where they come and they love the experience of being loved. And then all of a sudden, like they never mature to this point in which they begin to reciprocate. Like they come in for the experience of being loved, which is good, but they never mature past that point. Like if that's you this morning, like if you found yourself in those sort of shoes, like I just encourage you, like look at the boxes that come after this one and ask God to help you to grow your love. So the next box, the next way our love grows is that we start to love those who are like us. So this is when, we have this immense love for our families and friends. I would do anything for my family and friends, that kind of thing. But for us as Christians, like that expands to the body of Christ. It expands to our brothers and sisters in Jesus. And that's just what he calls us to. So Katie, give me John 13, and then we'll take a look at John 15. So John 13. This is at the Last Supper. So we're going to get to that story a little bit more later, but this is where we are. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Go to John 15. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. Jesus commands us to love one another. Like there's that phrase in the John 13 passage that says, this is how they'll know that you're my followers, by how you love one another. So if you were here in the fall when we were talking about Christian unity and how we care for each other and how we get along with each other, like that's where all of this fits. This is this love for each other, this caring for each other that exists. And Jesus says, that's going to be one of your witnesses to the world. Like the world will know, the people who are outside of this building will know that you're a follower of Jesus by the way you love the person in the pew in front of you, by the way you love the person who's sitting across the aisle from you. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? Like, how would you have to love the person in the pew in front of you or across the room or across the aisle, whatever it is? Like, how would you have to love that person so that other people would know you're a follower of Jesus? Like, how are we doing with that? So it starts here, right? Like, so we come in on Sunday morning, and I know some of us are rushing in on Sundays, right? Like maybe we're serving somewhere, so we roll in and we got to get to a classroom, or we got to get to our spot. And others of us, things are just crazy at home, and we bust in here at the last minute and get seated, or after the last minute, right? And so we just get in and get seated, and we're just here. But loving one another, this is like the easiest place to do it. Like, have you had a conversation of genuine care for someone since you've been in the building this morning? Like, have you asked someone, hey, how you doing? How's your week been? Hey, I heard you were going through this. Or, hey, did you have a good time this weekend? And actually listen to what they had to say. Like, have you had one of those conversations yet? The good news is you're still in the building. And so there's time afterwards for you to have that conversation. But we have to love one another. You should not leave this building until you have a conversation where you get to express that with them. So for those of you who are watching online, like this is unfortunate for you, right? Because you don't get to have the ease of walking up to someone in the lobby and expressing that kind of care and love for them. We hope you can be here soon. But in the meantime, you have to find other ways to do that. And I love sometimes watching the comments in the live stream and the way you guys who are watching express care for each other in the comments. Like, that's a really great thing. But we just got to go out of our way to express love and care for each other. So there's still two traps, though. The first one is sometimes we get really attached to our subset. So what I mean is, so we love people who are like us, and it starts with the church, but then we start to shrink it, right? And it's like, well, so I'm really engaged with and I really show love and care for the people who are around my age, or the people who, have a similar profession as me, or the people who have a similar background to me. Maybe they struggle with the same things or came out of the same culture as me. That's pretty dangerous to get into. Like, love one another is this. And we can't afford to shrink it down to this. The second trap we get into with this one is sometimes we reach this point where we really only know other Christians. I mean, you know people from work and from other places, but do you actually know them? For years, this was a major trap for those in the church, where we weren't good at building relationships with people outside of the church. These are two places where we can get stuck in this phase. Like, loving each other is what we're called to. It's our witness to the world. But our love still has to grow past that. And so our love grows past that to the people who are outside these walls. And so when we mature in Christ, our love expands so that we're loving our neighbors. So the vast majority of us, when you think about your neighbors, like, hopefully you like your neighbors. Most of you probably like your neighbors. If you don't, we'll get to them in a minute. But this is more than just liking your neighbors, right? Like, some of you are familiar with the story where Jesus is asked what the greatest commandment is, and they're trying to trip him up, and he says, well, it's love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he says, the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's like, how do we love our neighbors? So this morning we're framing it as we love our neighbors in gospel ways. And I want to say this means that we both share the good news with them and we are the good news to them. So aside from the fact that your car leaves your driveway every Sunday morning, do your neighbors know that you're a follower of Jesus? Like, have you ever just talked to them about Jesus? Have you ever offered to pray with them? Not just for them, but with them? Have you ever invited them to church? Like, we got to be willing to step out and share the good news with our neighbors. And I know it's hard, right? There's a lot of reasons why it's hard. And you might have reasons not to talk to your neighbors. Like, one time, I invited one of our neighbors to the fish fry, and I was in the middle of a long 10-minute conversation. They said, oh, yeah, thanks. And they just went back into their apartment and left me on the porch. Okay, that didn't go so great, right? So we have reasons. We think like, oh, it'll get awkward. It'll be just like that. It'll get awkward, and I won't want to talk to them. Or maybe we think, I think they have something against religion. Or maybe we think they already are a Christian, although we shouldn't really count on that. But listen, this doesn't need to look like blindsiding them with a sermon in the driveway. It needs to look like you getting to know them and getting involved in their life, and then look for opportunities to love them and share Jesus with them. We have to get to know them. So some of you have heard this story before, but this is actually about the neighbor who abandoned me when I invited them to the fish fry. So when Katie and I got married, we first moved into an apartment up on the heights above the hospital. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that area, but there are a gajillion people who live up there. There are just tons of people who live up on that circle. When we first looked at the apartment, our landlord had said, we're talking about all the apartment buildings that are up there, and I had never noticed. Like, I knew Drake Village was up there, and obviously the nursing homes there. But when you drive around that circle, there are apartment buildings everywhere with people. And they're multiple unit apartments. There are tons and tons of people that live up there, not to mention like all the houses that are up there. And so we moved up there, and it really was our desire to be a blessing to our neighbors, to show love to our neighbors in those kind of gospel ways. And so there were challenges. So we lived up there for 4 years, and by the end of the 4 years, we were the longest tenured tenant still in the building. Like everyone else, including the landlord, had left. And so everyone else was different than when we started. And so some of those neighbors we got to know, some of them we didn't. Some of them we got to talk to about Jesus, some of them we got to invite to church, and sometimes that went well, sometimes it did not go well, sometimes invitations were left off to the side and they never took us up on them. But we built good relationships with them. So there was one day that I came home, and one of our neighbors came out on his porch and met me in the driveway. And he said, hey, can I borrow some dish soap? I'm like, okay, how do you borrow dish soap? I'm like, okay, you'll borrow it and you'll just keep it, right? Like there's no way to give dish soap back. But I'm still thinking, how do I give you dish soap somehow? So I'm processing this, and I think he thought he needed more explanation. So he tells me, I spent the last of my change today on some food, and I just don't have any money to go buy dish soap. So, okay, so let me go inside and find some for you. So I'm looking for something to squeeze some dish soap into and take to him. So I'm looking under our sink, and under our sink I find this big old bottle of dish soap that we got from Dollar Tree that had probably lived under there for 2 months, and we'd just gotten and forgotten about. Thought, that's great, I'll just go give that to him. So I grabbed it, went outside, and when I handed it to him, he started to tear up. And he said, I just wonder how things would have been different if I had neighbors like you earlier in my life. It's dish soap, right? It's just dish soap. I was taken aback by that. I'm like, it's one of those moments where you don't know exactly what to say. It wasn't just dish soap, right? And it wasn't just that moment. This was the culmination of 100 little things that had happened before it. This was the culmination of all the times we chose to stand out in the driveway and talk when we pulled in rather than just waving and heading inside. It's the culmination of times when they asked for other little things, maybe a ride to town, and sure, hop in. All of those lead to, I wonder how my life would be different if I had neighbors like you earlier. It's pretty incredible. And the beauty was, that was an open door. So after that, I had opportunities to pray with this neighbor more than once. And after a relative passed away, one they were pretty close to, I had the opportunity to share the gospel with them. But that happens after a long, long stretch of just getting involved and getting to know them. I get it. Sometimes you get home from work and you're tired and you don't want to, you see the neighbor out in the yard mowing the grass and you don't want to, you just don't want to connect. You just don't want to engage. You just want to head inside. I get it. Sometimes our neighbors are challenging people and talking to them is a real bear, and we know that they're going to maybe bring up awkward things, or they're just not people we normally spend time with, so we don't understand how to relate to them. Maybe you live out in the country, and so, you don't, you see your neighbors when you're driving by to your house. This is just something that we got to wrestle within ourselves and get over. We need to love our neighbors. It's what we're called to do as followers of Jesus. Shouldn't your neighborhood be better because a Christian, you live there? Shouldn't your neighbors be grateful that you're there? I think so. Are your neighbors glad that you live next to them? And I don't mean that they're glad you live next to them because you don't cause any trouble, but glad that you live there because you make a difference in their life. They should be. And it's not on them, it's on us. It's on us to be the kind of neighbors that help draw them to Christ. Well, we could stop right there, and that would probably give us plenty to work on, because this is hard. But I want to say that's the trap for this box, because it gets hard here, and so we want to stop here. But if we're going to love like Jesus, if we're going to try to be like Christ, then there's one more box that we got to go to. There's one more box that our love needs to grow to. So Katie, give me the Matthew 5 passage. Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, that is complete, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Okay, so you might be thinking right now, hey, I got this one. This one's easy. I don't have any enemies. I'm a super likable guy. Everyone likes me. I don't have anything against anyone. No one has anything against me. I can love my enemies perfect because I just don't have any. But is there anyone who just is a pain for you? Just a pain for you to deal with? Is there anyone who's difficult, makes life hard for you? It's like every time I'm around them, they just make things harder. Do you have people you grumble about? People that just make you frustrated? People that sometimes you start to think, or maybe you have a little group that you say unkind things about them to? You have people you scoff at, people you mock, people you avoid. Those are your enemies. Those are the people Jesus is talking about. And he's asking you to love them. He's asking you to do good for them. He's asking for you to pray for them. So Jesus gave us a couple amazing examples of this that actually start this week. So today's Palm Sunday, and it begins Holy Week. And, eventually we get to Easter, but there are several poignant moments along the way, and one is Thursday. So on Thursday, it's Maundy Thursday, and that's when we remember the Last Supper. So one of the very first things Jesus does at the Last Supper is wash the disciples' feet. So that's an amazing moment all by itself, because that's like servants' work, that's slaves' work, and here's Jesus is doing it. But he washes all of the disciples' feet. He washes Peter, he washes John, he washes Bartholomew, and he washes Judas's feet. Judas, who had already sold Jesus out. Judas, who, in just a short few hours, was going to participate in the arrest of Jesus. He washes Judas's feet. So, like most of us, we would have met Judas at the door and said, just beat it, get on with what you're going to do. Or when everyone's lined up and we'd be washing feet, we'd get to Judas and just say, hey, just go have a seat at the table. Move on. It's not what Jesus does. Jesus serves him. Jesus does servants' work, slaves' work for this person who's going to betray him. Well, then we get to a few hours later, right? And Jesus is on the cross. And, there's so much physical trauma that Jesus experienced on the cross. So first you had the scourging, you had the beatings that he undertook, and the crown of thorns, and then you get actually put on the cross, and there's nails in the hands and nails in the feet, and there's the whole thing where you can't really breathe, and you have to push yourself up to breathe. That just digs everything in more. Like the physical trauma that these people had inflicted on him was immense. But on top of all that, then you have all the emotional and mental trauma they would have experienced. So Judas stabs him in the back. Peter turns his back on him by saying he doesn't know him. You've got people mocking him. You've got his clothes stripped off him, and he's paraded through town carrying his cross. Even the guy who's getting crucified next to him is insulting him and mocking him. Like so much. Like so much pain and so much trauma that Jesus is experiencing in that moment. And the people who are inflicting it to him are right there, yucking it up the whole time. And Jesus just says, Father, forgive them, because they don't know what they're doing. And it's not a threat. It's a genuine request to his Father. Forgive them. They don't understand. Man, you know what? The things my enemies do seem pretty small in comparison. You know, sometimes I hear people say this, and I hear Christians say this as well. I hate people. I just hate people. Oh, man, that breaks God's heart. That breaks God's heart to hear us say that we hate people whom he desperately loves and sent his son to die for. I know, I don't really hate people. I just don't like what they do, and it was frustrating, and so on and so forth. I get it. But the things we say and the things we think are not just words. Like, they build stuff inside us. I hate people does not build love inside us. It builds enmity. It builds anger. And it eventually builds actual hate. This is the kind of love Jesus calls us to. To love our enemies. To love the people who are difficult for us. How does your love need to grow this morning? Have you been ignoring your neighbors? Is your neighborhood any better for you living there? Whether you're all crammed in an apartment building or you're a country mile apart. Is your neighborhood any better because you live there? If you've fallen short with your brothers and sisters in Christ and you breeze in and breeze out without ever engaging anyone? And how about those people who are just a pain in your side? How are you doing with them? So it was in that time when Jesus was on that cross that his body broke and his blood was shed. Body broken, bread, blood shed, juice, wine. Each Sunday we come up and we participate in this great act of love that he had for us. Died on the cross for you. Sacrificed himself for you. We come up and we receive the plate and the cup. And I want to say he turns to us and say, would you do the same for your brothers and sisters, for your neighbors, and for your enemies?